Great. Hi, Thomas. It's lovely to have you here today to speak on the recent elections in Germany. I mean, South Africa also had very recently its elections, and for the first time ever since 1994, the ANC, lost its majority, the African National Congress, and was sort of forced to go into a coalition with other political parties. The FNF, obviously, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, of course, works quite closely with the Democratic Alliance in South Africa. And that party also joined that coalition government, which is called the Government of National Unity in South Africa. And yeah, the talk of the town, I think, obviously is coalitions and relations in those coalitions, and how long will they last? And just recently, you had an election there in Germany following a collapse of your coalition on that side. And quite curious to know, what led to that coalition collapse, or what was the sort of disagreements there? I almost want to ask that led to, Germany, or Germans having to go to the voting stations.
Yeah. Yeah. First, hello, William. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's an honor just to spread the word of German politics into South
Mm.
Africa. Very nice, very nice. Thank you for the occasion. Yeah. What led to the situation that we faced with this elections in February? We had 3 weeks ago, 3.5 weeks. Um, it was in 2021 an installation of, for Germany, some new sort of coalition, a so-called progressive coalition, which followed a long time government by the Christian Democrat CDU, govern, yeah, dominated governments in Germany. When I studied political science in the last century, so to say, it was understood that everybody said there are two parties that normally rule over Germany, and the Social Democrats or the Christian Democrats, with a vast majority in any kind. Now, in 2021, we had the situation that we have overcome this phase of domination, clear domination by CDU coalitions, which had lasted since 2005 with Chancellor Merkel. Um, and there were three partners who had to build a coalition, to form a coalition: the Social Democrats, the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP, which was quite something new for Germany because we hadn't had three-part coalitions before that. Three partners were quite diverse, so to say, politically. And in the beginning, this seemed to be a chance in Germany, a progressive coalition. It was the time for that, because the conservative, the CDU coalition just had not led to the results the people wanted. That was clearly to be found in the elections 2021. Um, it was the chance for new politics in Germany, just trying to do some social things, just some opening windows in Germany, and doing new things like liberalization, like ecological politics in connection with liberalization, and just keeping an eye on social politics for all three partners. Um, this soon, so to say, ended. The honeymoon just ended early, because the problems were quite visible then. There were dispute between the parties. Tensions were there between all three parties, and not only the SPD on one side and Green and Liberals on the other side, but it was Green against the Liberals, SPD against the Greens, SPD against FDP, which really formed a public opinion of they're just disputing, they're not acting, they're disputing. That was in a nutshell, that was what led to the new elections, the informal elections. We had to elect the new parliament early, 1 year earlier than planned, because the government, the coalition, just split up. Why did it split up? It was mainly because of the economic policies that the Ampelkoalition, the traffic light coalition, it was called because of the party colors, red, yellow, and green. And so the economic policies were the main matter in this time. The FDP wasn't very satisfied with what the other two parties tried to do as economic policies. The FDP very much was into something called the debt brake, not spend any money that you don't have, don't make any debts with it. Finance Minister Christian Lindner from the FDP published a paper with proposals how to do an economics policies in a liberal sense, just to prevent too much debt. And Chancellor Scholz took this or saw this as some kind of, an attack on him and on his politics, on his way to lead the government, and so to say, sacked Christian Lindner as finance minister. And that was the moment that this coalition broke up. This was early in last year's November. And so we had to face something like a new election, an extraordinary election by Chancellor Scholz, who said this should be in February. That's what happened, just in short. Hope this came over as clear as it was.
No, I hear you. Look, so in our government or coalition, they had their sort of first budget speech that was supposed to happen a few weeks ago. And the Minister of Finance came to Parliament and he was ready to present his budget. But just moments before he presented his budget, some of the coalition partners found out that the ANC thought that, I don't know, but they imagined that they still have the majority, wanted to propose a tax increase of 2%. And this was outrightly rejected by the Democratic Alliance and some of the other parties in the coalition. And then for the first time in 30 years, the budget speech was cancelled, subsequently postponed. And I think just this past week, they tried to do another run of the budget speech, and everyone came back to Parliament. And the minister then recognized, okay, perhaps 2% cannot work, and he then proposed a half of that 2% VAT tax increase, and again that also got rejected. And I mean, I think it speaks to some type of compromises that probably has to be made at some point, because I mean, if you delay a budget, you delay programs, you delay government programs. And perhaps what I want to ask is, do you think that political parties who find themselves in coalitions will ever get some type of compromise? And shouldn't there be at some point a space where you realize that the people suffer under that?
Yeah, well, that's of course a very difficult question. Whenever parties mingle and make a coalition, form a coalition, they have to be prepared to make compromises, because there won't be any pure liberal or green, ecological or social democratic policy when you do a coalition, because that's why the parties are different, and that's why the voters vote for a special party. Those who stand for, so to say, reasonable finance politics, which the FDP favors, always have to make clear reasons, make up clear reasons for that, because it's very much easier to spend money and to tell the people we have to spend money for something than to keep things together, to keep, so to say, the box shut and not to spend money so easily. That's what made this coalition so difficult. In other points of politics, of policies, they found compromises in social politics, in legal politics, and all that. The result of 3 years of a traffic light coalition isn't as bad as you expected when you hear they broke up 3 years after having been founded. But the main matter, finance politics, well, the FDP said we can't do any compromise in that. If, as you told, if in Germany the chancellor would have come over and said, "Will we raise taxes for 2% or for 1%?" would have been the same case. The FDP would definitely have said, "We don't do this. We don't do any increasing in taxes. So that was one clear point for a cut. Compromising is always not only necessary, but it's basic for a coalition. And that's what makes it so difficult. And the German system, which I mentioned quite in the start, was dependent nearly on two parties, because two parties can find easy solutions when having dispute over a point. Three parties, much more difficult.
So that then led to your coalition breaking up, and then a new election being announced, and obviously voters then going out in their numbers to vote. Quite interestingly, some South Africans were asking, why are the Germans voting on a Sunday? No, is it normally on a weekend, and is it a one-day voting system, or are there a few days? How does that process work?
It's always on a Sunday because, well, I don't know if that's the reason that people should not go away from work and go voting. It's just one day, and it's from early in the morning, 8 o'clock, till 6 p.m. So that's the time when German voters have to go there, or they vote by letter. So that's possible. In 2021, just this led to pure chaos, especially in Berlin, when they closed the shops to vote, the vote bureaus, so say voting bureaus, tried to close it, and there were lines of people lining up outside because there had been some misorganizations, and so that showed how difficult it is to do it in one day. Usually it works.
Interesting. I think we had a common issue in our 24 elections when so we have certain days for special voting. So those are now people who cannot vote on voting day itself, etc. People with special needs or etc. And they get to apply for that. But the voting day itself in 2024, we had an issue where a new voter system introduced by the Electoral Commission, which was a technology-based, stopped working at some point, and then they had to go to a manual process, and then people voted until late the next morning because the lines were just too long and the administration was not working. But nonetheless, the Germans then now voted, and you have a particular outcome at the moment. But what would you say, does those results tell us about the sort of voter sentiments currently, in Germany? I mean, they did say there's been a rise in sort of support for the, alternative for Germany, for the far right parties. And what does that tell us?
Yeah, it just stands in some sort of development in Germany over the last months of the traffic light coalition, when the opinion polls clearly showed how much or how deeply this coalition was rejected by the people being asked in these opinion polls. There was massive rejection of the coalition. The survey values were extremely negative for the chancellor as well as for the parties doing it. And when the coalition had split up, this was accompanied by the FDP being blamed for the split up. And so in the opinion polls before the elections, which went over the year's change over New Year's Day, it showed that the parties from the far right would become stronger by the elections, and it showed that the people were looking for some way to express their protest against the policies of the coalition from before. On the other hand, there were the protesters. On the other hand, there were those in the electorate who were sort of looking for a safe haven, so to say, with the problems getting more and more. Just take the Ukraine conflict, which is massively influencing the opinion in Germany and in Europe. Just take the financial crisis going ahead with that. Take the other things. The main issues were migration and economy in German electoral campaign. So there were signs how the outcome of the elections would be. And everybody expected that there was in the electorate there was some kind of a mood for change. I would say there was rather a mood for safety. The people looked for one party that would tell them what they would do and what they had to do. So that's maybe the outcome. If we talk about the outcomes, let's talk about one fact that I came across weeks or some days after the elections. One survey institute asked the people if they were satisfied with the result of the elections, and 60% of those being asked were not satisfied. Not satisfied. And mainly were these the supporters of CDU and CSU, the conservatives, who were satisfied. Of course, they won the elections. But the other ones were absolutely dissatisfied. The supporters of the Green Party, only by 10% were satisfied with the outcome of the elections. How come? As I said, I think people were looking for safety with giving their votes. Ones gave their vote to the CDU-CSU because they had said, we know what to do. We have been looking at this politics for 3 years now, and we know the solutions. And on the other hand, the far right is always on the way to say, we know your problems, just hand the power over to us and we will deal with it. That's quite an easy thing. Well, I have to mention it. The FDP went out of parliament, and the people were asked, is this positive or is this negative? And the vote for that was nearly split after the election. 48% that said we think it's positive that the FDP no more is in parliament. 41% said this is negative. And that's quite a good point when you get out and get thrown out of parliament, so to say, and still round about 40% say, well, that's not good that they're out.
So Thomas, what was the voter turnout? Was it kind of similar than previous years, or?
Yeah, it was, as FDP people said, and so I'm allowed to say that it was clear disaster. It was a disaster for the FDP. They had 11.5% in 2021 and came out with 4.3%, which means they were out of parliament because we have this 5% hurdle. The party that does not come to the result of 5% of the second votes will not be in parliament, and the votes are lost. So that's what happened to the FDP. That's why they went out of parliament. And we had an effect that people, when the elections were done and the FDP was out, people said, well, we didn't want that. We miss them now, but you don't get anything for that. Asked, I have another count out, asked if they wished an FDP comeback in 4 years. 41% said yes, 41% said no, which is quite a good result again. So there's hope. That's what I want to say towards the FDP. There's hope in 4 years, but the outcome was as it was. The outcome, let me say some words to that. The result was nearly as inspected by the opinion research institutes. The CDU-CSU became strongest party with around about 30% of the votes. The far right, Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, came second with 20. They doubled their votes from 2021. And the SPD only came third. For the first time in German history, the Social Democrats were not either strongest or second strongest party. It wasn't clearly a mood for change. I talked about this before. It was just some party has to do it, one party, and this were the Christian Democrats. Some things about the election result really worry us, not only the liberals, but those who watch on or who try to analyze elections. The young people, those at the age of 18 to 29 years, had voted massively for liberals and Greens in 21, And they moved away from both of these parties and voted either left or right. And the CDU and SPD, as the classical strongest parties in Germany, in this group of ages, reached 1/4, 25% of the votes, which is no good sign. The elders, the over 60-year-olds, they voted for CDU and SPD, not for the far right. And they really, so to say, saved the election, because if they hadn't done that, maybe we had a right-wing majority or something. So that was a reason deeply for concern. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany, gets stronger, especially in the east of Germany, which has some reasons that would lead too far for South Africa to explain the reasons why in eastern Germany the AfD is that strong. And what changed, the right-wing parties, or the right-wing party, so to say, doesn't only get the votes from the protest voters, but they get the votes from those who say, this is my party, this is my program. And this really has to worry if you are liberal. That's, for me, the mainly important outcome of the elections. We have some kind of a new strongest party. It's quite unclear what coalition it's going to be. I think we're going to talk about this then. And we have a party without we have a parliament without a party who stands for freedom and liberalism, which hurts us most. Been a bit too long, sorry, but
no, that's interesting. Thank you. I do not want to know, like you've now mentioned that, there now needs to be, obviously, a new coalition needs to be formed. Do we kind of know what the sort of conversations are like at the moment, and would you say it's going to work?
Yeah, first one, yes. Second one, I don't know. It's just well, it's quite on the screen that the CDU, the Christian Democrats, will form a coalition with the Social Democrats, which then have some kind of a slight majority. They need Germany's parliament has 630 seats, so the absolute majority will be 316. And if CDU, Christian Democrats and Social Democrats form a coalition, they will have, let me count it, 328, which really shows it's not a vast majority that they have, so they have to be extra careful. The Social Democrats were sort of thrown out of government. They were the leading party in the last government. Psychologically, they have to find their role again, just not being the strongest party, but sort of being minor to the CDU, and the CDU has the prerogatives of doing decisions in this coalition. There are disappointed SPD members, of course. There were those who are disappointed because they were in parliament and are not in parliament anymore. The SPD lost many votes in parliament. The Christian Democrats will definitely not be willing to do social democratic policy. And the SPD, the Social Democrats, will definitely not be willing to turn back the reforms that they did in the last 3 years. So that's the difficulties they face. If it works, I don't know, but it has to, because there is no alternative to that. When you take German politics, it's some kind of a sport here before elections, just to say with whom you are not going to get into a coalition. So the CDU said, we will not do any coalition with the right wings. We'd rather not make a coalition with the Greens. So what's left over if the FDP is out? It's only the Social Democrats. This doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how that, indeed, if it gets formed, how that's going to play out for you guys. I don't know, but I think perhaps lastly, if you may, You've now mentioned, which I mean, something which is perhaps quite concerning, that there are no longer, parties in parliament. It sort of stands for freedom, democracy and liberalism. And what do you think, should happen? I mean, you did now indicate that, 41%, do note that, we need certain parties back in
Yeah.
parliament. And what should these parties, I think, do to try and regain that trust, to get themselves back?
Um, yeah, if I could tell them something, I would say just be truly liberal. Just
Mm,
be in not only economically liberal, but be in a social way
mm,
liberal. Uh, Civil rights, human rights, just doing what has always been in German liberalism, two wings of something, the so-called social liberals and the economically liberals. Um, that would be an advice, just to be fair and true, and
mm,
just show that you're still needed.
mm. Absolutely. Great. Thanks,
That's
Thomas. It
it.
was I think no, that was wonderful. Thank you. It was lovely to chat to you. Thomas, you of course at the Liberal Institute, which is part of
Yes.
the FNF's think tank organizations, if I'm correct.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay.
I'm the deputy head of the Liberal Institute, and with the main working space of doing opinion polling and
Mm,
elections and all that, democracy policies and all
mm,
that. Yeah, we are the think tank within the think tank, because the
mhm.
Friedrich Naumann Foundation itself is some kind of a
Indeed.
think tank in many ways. We're doing political education and all what is concerned and connected with it. And the Liberal Institute is plainly said there for developing new ideas, developing
Mm,
liberal ideas, and planting it into the heads of those who listen to us.
mm.
And
Absolutely.
this goes back to needing a stage for that, or needing some public for that. That will be a problem in the forthcoming 4 years, if it takes so long, just to find the public and the ears to spread our message. But I hope we'll do so.
And a much
That's it.
important message indeed.
Yeah,
Thank you, Thomas. It was really lovely to chat to you, and I trust that those who will listen to this will find some valuable insight from the conversation's been over the past few months in Germany, and something perhaps food for thought. I think also for our coalition on this side. To recognize that it could easily break, and we should be careful on how we deal with certain policies, and how do we find compromise.
definitely. Yes. And then many greetings to the wonderful country of South Africa. I would love to go there. Friends of mine have been there, and they're full of uh, uh, things they learned there and saw there. Must be
Mm.
beautiful, and enjoy it.
Indeed. No, great, Thomas. You must have a lovely afternoon further. It was